Art teachers, what's the most disturbing artwork a student has ever submitted? Art teacher here. I had a kindergartner draw a bunch of long triangles with handles and red spray coming off of them, looking like the way a 5-year-old would draw a knife or a dagger, and lots of red liquid. I asked him to tell me about his drawing, and he got all shy and wouldn't say anything. I kept his drawing and showed it to his babysitter, who picked him up from school and relayed my concern. She scoffed and said, "Oh, that's just a rocket ship. He draws them all the time." Turns out the red was fire, not red liquid. What I saw as the handle of a knife was the booster engine of the rocket. Face palm. I should have known. The kid is obsessed with rockets. Well, looks like it turns out it's him, the OP, with the obsession with knives. Story 2. I was an art teacher at a cruelty against women shelter. I worked with kids of all ages, and sometimes if they didn't want to do art, they would read or play with the toys or color. One day, a 4-year-old wants to read me a book. He can't read, but I say, sure, why not? A few minutes in, I realize he's telling me the story of his mom having a meltdown the morning she was evicted, and the police came to her apartment. He's just flipping pages, casually telling the story somehow relating to this book. Although it may not be so disturbing, it was really sad. Another time, I told this kid to paint whatever he wanted, and I just found out he had been essayed for years. He painted the word hope. I hung it up. Not disturbing, but that's something that has stayed with me. Story 3. When I was a kid, like 8 or 9, me and my siblings would draw bubble letters of our name, huge on that old-timey connected printer paper. And inside the letters, we would draw stick people being put through the chambers, like passing away in acid pits and acid rain, and passing away on spikes and being eaten by ants, drowning, etc. At the time, it seemed perfectly normal. I even hung these masterpieces up on my bedroom wall. My parents didn't say anything about it. Looking back, I can see how that might come off as disturbing, but I actually had a great childhood with very loving parents. I just happened to enjoy ending stick people. Long story short, kids are just weird sometimes. Story 5. Not a teacher, not even art class, technically, so sorry if this isn't what you're looking for. I hated my photography teacher in grade 12. He was a schmuck. We had an assignment every week where we would submit pictures under the topic of the things like autumn or fashionista. One week, he assigned us burst of color. He had been especially mad at me and a couple of my buddies off that week. My buddy Emily and I were downtown when we saw a squirrel in a parking lot. It was fairly fresh. Being a 17-year-old nuthead, I thought it would be hilarious to submit it for the burst of color topic. I got called down to the office the next day to talk about it. Apparently, I had really upset my teacher and he was genuinely worried. Looking back, I'd probably be worried about me too. Story 5. I was in a fraternity in college and lived in the fraternity house for 2 years. Best time I never want to have again. Anyway, next door to our fraternity house was a kindercare. Yeah, I don't know why they did that, but they did. Anyway, during my senior year, one of our frat brothers passed away when he crashed his motorcycle. We don't know how he crashed, but he did and passed away. Apparently, he was conscious until he got to the hospital and passed away when they put him in a medically induced coma. As a kind gesture, the daycare ladies had the kids write us cards and delivered all of them to us. I don't think the teachers looked through all of them because some of them were kind of brutal. Now keep in mind these kids were preschool age to kindergarten. One of them was simple but cold. On the front it said, "Hey." And then you open the card to a drawing of a watch and the bold words, "Time limit." We were shocked, to say the least. There was a lot of confusion about whether or not we were being threatened by a 6-year-old. Another one drew a picture of our house and it looked like a legit prison, bars instead of windows and everything. Another one said, "I hope your friend stops being gone or else you'll never see them again." That one was quite disturbing. And that's all I can remember for now. I'll text a couple of my buddies I still keep in touch with and see if they can remember more. Story 6. A bit of an anecdotal entry. My mom is an educator. She told me of a student she had who admitted that he had been once sent to the school psychiatrist. You see, he drew all of his crayon drawings in black, houses and families, done in black outline, animals and oceans, black, grass and plants, black. Mick Jagger had nothing on this kid. But as it turns out, this kid wasn't a sociopath. He wasn't depressed and angry. He didn't want to end his parents. No, he was just totally colorblind, and his table mates at art class always stuck him with the black crayon and hoarded all the colors for themselves. Since he couldn't tell the difference anyway, he was more than happy to oblige. Story 7. I've been teaching art for 9 years. The most disturbing image I've ever come across was from a 5-year-old who was visiting our campus for the day to see if our school was a good fit for him. He joined our first grade class, and I had assigned our students to create an environment around an object that I had cut out and pasted onto a blank sheet of paper. The objects were from home and living magazines, so the images were mostly food, furniture, animals, cars, etc. The child who was visiting was given a paper with an antique bathtub glued onto it. This kid proceeded to draw a person being ended in the bathtub, with people looking in through the bathroom windows, smiling at the crime. The image was pretty insane. When I asked him why he drew this, he said, "This is the kind of stuff I like." I told him that I was going to keep it and give it to his mom when she came to pick him up. As class was ending, he swiped the drawing off of my desk, crumpled it up, and threw it into the boys' bathroom trash. I pulled the drawing out of the trash, showed it to our school dean, and explained what happened. Thankfully, he wasn't admitted to the school that year. Story 8. Not a teacher, but I am the legal guardian of my nephew now for reasons that will become obvious. I used to pick him up regularly from his infant school as his mother, my sister, is a waste of space. One day, his teacher pulled me aside and showed me a picture he had drawn. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing before it focused into a picture of a woman with red liquid around her and needles scattered around. The teacher was very concerned. I mean, borderline calling the police and social services and not letting him leave with me. I asked my nephew, who was about 6 at the time, what this was about. He explained that this is what his mommy looked like most nights. I broke down crying, the teacher broke down crying, and I called social services myself from the headmaster's office. They placed him in my care as a temporary measure and investigated. Turns out my sister had started to take substances via needles and accidentally broke something one night, hence the red liquid. 6 years later, and I don't know if she is clean, but my nephew lives with me and my family as if he is my own, and he has never been happier. His now former teacher is a good family friend and regularly comes around and brings her kids. My sister was troubled before she started on the substances and spiraled her life out of control. We did try and help her, but anything we tried was met with anger and cruelty unless it was money, food, or gifts that she could sell or swap for substances. This went on for months before the school incident pushed things over the edge for me. My nephew did miss meals or go to school in dirty clothes a couple of times before the substances were involved, and each time it happened, I would take him to my home with my wife and kids and make excuses for my sister's behavior. We would help by having him for a few nights, getting him new clothes, making sure he ate and paying for his school dinners, etc. In the end, it was hurting him more by doing these things and then sending him back to her to start again a few weeks later. Please remember that this was a 5 to 6 year old boy who had to learn that sometimes mommy couldn't feed him when he got home because she didn't care enough. I've honestly tried to make her a part of his life, but was met with almost complete disinterest. Story 9. A 9-year-old drew a very accurate picture of the playground. The swings and slides were depicted just as they are, along with all the other campers. The picture was well done, but I was taken aback by the way he drew the children. Each figure had their arms and legs drawn at odd angles and there were red marks around them. I asked the boy about his drawing and he said, "They all got hurt." Then he pointed to an empty spot on the page and said, "I'm here." He then pointed to one of the figures with the red marks and said, "And you're here too, Miss Teacher." He had a single father who was an MMA fighter, and I assumed he had just seen some intense things and was otherwise a very sweet child. Story 10. I'm not an art teacher, but I had my art as a child taken wrongly by one. In school, I was asked to draw my family, so I drew my dad, mom, my older brother, and myself. I drew us in a line in that order because that represented our ages. Dad is the oldest, mom second, my brother third, and me fourth. I also drew us in height representation. Dad is the tallest, mom second tallest at the time, now she's the shortest, lol. Brother third tallest, and me fourth tallest. They turned me over to counselors and investigated my family because I put myself at the end of the line and made myself the smallest. They said because of how I drew myself, I considered myself inferior to, and was possibly mistreated by the rest of my family. I was just trying to be accurate. Story 11. I work with children with special needs. It is inclusionary, so some are typically developing. I have seen some weird pictures, but nothing disturbing. This one, typically developing girl, drew a picture of her and I together. She was a lot taller than me in the picture. She was showing me the picture, and whilst explaining it, she just stopped and went, "Oh, I don't even know why I drew myself taller than you." Not disturbing, but off-putting and definitely unexpected for her to be able to point that out at 4 years old. Story 12. When I was around 9 or 10, my parents forced me to attend a private religious school. And I mean, it's one of those extremist religious schools where they try to scare you into believing. So, as you can imagine, religion was ingrained in pretty much every aspect of the curriculum. We were told to paint our depiction of said God we were supposed to believe in. It wasn't all too surprising that a large portion of these kids, along with myself, portrayed terrifying, menacing depictions of a God surrounded in fire. Some of the kids even drew God throwing them into a pit of fire. I think there were only 1 or 2 kids who actually had a positive illustration. There was a pretty big crap storm about it within our school. We didn't even fully realize what we were doing. We were just mimicking the stories we were told. When I was in kindergarten, I drew pages full of raindrops because I wanted to practice the concave convex form, which I found hard to draw equally, shaped left and right. Yeah, I was a weird kid. The thing is, everybody thought I was drawing tears. They called my parents, investigated the issue officially, nearly called the youth welfare office or whatever it's called in English. It was a 1 day nightmare. They found nothing because my parents are the nicest people ever, but they actually forbid me to draw any more shapes of raindrops. I mean, what the heck? It was the first time I saw stupid people in power. I now blame my crappy art skills on them because they literally didn't let me practice drawing. I freaking liked drawing and I stopped. Story 14. Oh shoot, it's been almost, 20 years? But I think I recall an art class I had with a classmate who seemed a bit troubled back in fourth grade, I believe. It was around Christmas time, and in our class, we were all making Christmas themed art. Anyway, while my memory is a bit hazy, I definitely remember this one classmate drawing something like a snowman peeing on Santa, complete with a very crudely drawn depiction of that body part and a stream of liquid coming out. The teacher saw it and was very upset with the classmate. I remember he started crying and saying that he hadn't done anything wrong, while the teacher sent him off to what I can only assume was the principal or guidance counselor. That kid eventually got sent to a special school. I wonder whatever happened to him. Story 15. I was a student, but this applies. I was extremely depressed. My grades were crap because I just couldn't see living long enough for college. Our project was the whole trace your hand and decorate it. Other girls gave themselves painted nails, designs, etc. I gave myself wounds, and I don't remember the other details. But it was bad enough that this should have been a big red flag to my teachers that I needed help. My art teacher only told me that it was inappropriate and to redo it. I was 10. Teachers, if a kid is obviously in mental pain and something is wrong, don't ask them if everything is okay at home. They will say yes, because that's what they live with and probably for a long time, so as long as they weren't beaten before going to school, it's all good. Helping them earlier will give them a better shot at surviving a cruel or neglectful home. I'm 25 now and can't get into college because my grades all through high school were awful because I was constantly thinking, I won't live long enough to graduate or go to college, why bother? I really wish that someone had stood up for me. Story 16. I'm a psychologist and work with juveniles in the criminal justice system. Art therapy is part of that, and as you can imagine, these children come out with some really disturbing work. Obviously, I can't share any specific examples, but I've had numerous child depictions of essay and other crimes pass through my office. Art therapy gives a child the chance to express their thoughts, which may be otherwise suppressed and hidden from us. So we try to encourage free expression, even if it means I stay awake at nights worrying for these children. Story 17. Not a teacher, but this is kind of funny and somewhat relevant. When my daughter was 7 or 8, every time she got in trouble or mad at us because she didn't get her way, she would go to her room and write stories. One day, I found a stack of papers while cleaning, and it turns out those stories were about the mean ogre that didn't let the princess play with her cell phone, or the ugly witch that would not take the poor lost girl back to the mall. They were so freaking funny and made me proud that my daughter took such a creative way to let out her emotions. She is 14 now and writes fan fiction, so I guess it's just her creative outlet. Story 18. So I am not a teacher, but I had the disturbed spoiler he wasn't and still isn't child that the teachers were concerned about because of one particular painting or drawing combo my son drew in first grade. So I'm going to try to make this short. In my oldest son's first year of preschool, he discovered deer hunting by way of his dad. Cool, no problem. We live in a rural area where that is common. Eventually, through 2 years of preschool and kindergarten, my son developed an obsession with Army anything. Wars, battles, all of it. Sorry, I came back to add American wars and battles as we live in the USA. I honestly thought it was pretty cool that while other boys his age, like dinosaurs or Superman, whatever, my son loved to read about the American Revolution or the Battle of Gettysburg. The more detail, the better. Not necessarily about the passing away, but he was very interested in the different uniforms, the medals, the horses' saddles, what they ate, all that stuff. Okay, so flip to week 3 of first grade. I get a phone call that I needed to come to his school immediately. They said my son was fine, but it was extremely important. So I rushed there while trying to get a hold of his father, which proved hopeless. I get to the school and walk into the office and immediately know something's off. In the VP's office is where we converged, the art teacher, his teacher, the principal, the VP, my son, a police officer, and the school counselor. So I immediately go into mom freakout mode. Talk was exchanged. I gathered that my son made a painting or drawing that concerned the teachers, who thought this might indicate something going on at home. So I said, okay, let's see the picture. It was very clearly, to me immediately and to the rest after I said it, that what he drew or painted was a battlefield scene complete with a hospital tent that had some realistically drawn injuries, people being injured with weapons, as good as a first grader can paint and draw, which wasn't great, obviously. Holy crap, I just had to take a deep breath. He's 10 now, still loves the Army, Navy, Marines, wars, and still loves to draw. But if that wasn't the scariest 15 minutes of my life, phew. Story 19. I know this will be buried and it's sort of the opposite of the OP's question, but I'll answer anyway. I lived in Long Beach, California until I was 10. When I was in first grade, we had a field trip to Bolsa Chica, a local and ecologically important wetlands. For most children, the highlight of the trip had been the lone sandpiper we saw, with its long legs allowing it to see above the grasses, and its large feet and small body weight making it hard to detect. After returning from our field trip, our assignment was to draw what we had seen. Most drew the sandpaper, a few more some other small animals, but I drew what I had seen for most of the trip: black sand and a few long grass stalks. The next week, my mother was called to a parent teacher conference. I normally was top of my class in most things, so she was a bit surprised. My teacher let her know I had done a drawing that may indicate developmental disabilities or mistreatment and showed her my drawing. My mother's response was that marshes were dark and sparsely vegetated, and there was nothing wrong with my drawing because that is what I saw. My mom is not particularly maternal or nice, but her standing up for me then was one of the greatest moments of my childhood. Story 20. There was this kid in 6th grade who was pretty troubled. He brought toys to school, didn't listen to anyone at all, and had multiple teachers before coming into my class. My teacher was such a cool guy, but my teacher didn't take any crap. Once he dumped the kid's desk out all over the floor because he got so frustrated with all of his tinker toys and makeshift slingshots and all the bull crap he would keep in there. There wasn't a paper of schoolwork in there. In the process of this dumping of the desk, there were multiple drawings of this kid hurting and ending all the people he didn't like at school, including the teacher. It was probably the most disturbing thing ever. This kid was like 11. Story 21. Student here with disturbing art. In 8th grade, I read Stephen King's apt pupil story, which, spoiler warning, is about a kid who takes an interest in World War II. His neighbor turns out to be a war criminal who ran patent and was head of some terrible operations. The old man wants to live quietly, but the kid blackmails him into recounting his past. They both manipulate each other over the years, and their lives become intertwined and damaged. They have a dark connection, almost a twisted need for one another, while also harboring resentment. The old man's dark inclinations resurface, and the kid becomes desensitized. Eventually, the situation escalates tragically. This is a very brief summary that doesn't fully capture the story. End of spoilers. Now, this story and the whole book, different seasons, which I still greatly enjoy, left quite the impression on me. I often find myself influenced by the characters in the books I read. Frankenstein and Heart of Darkness had a noticeable effect on me until I started a new book. In art, though, my interpretation of Todd and Dusander, apt people characters, really came through, and I drew this large picture of a World War II era gas mask. From the eye holes, I depicted a flow of green, viscous liquid and gas, as if the mask were expelling something toxic. The mask also had drips of this green substance. While this was an awkward phase for me, I seemed to instinctively avoid graphic depictions. I had a stylized, almost cartoonish quality that perhaps didn't raise too many alarms about my mental state. There was a barbed wire fence in the background, which I added thinking of the scene where Magneto is separated from his mother in the X-Men movie, and then I included shadowy figures on the other side of the fence. Alright, you can tell pretty well that OP was a big reader growing up, because he writes pretty well. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Please do help me reach my next milestone of 60,000 subscribers. Thank you in advance, and let's move on to the next story. Story 22. I'm not sure if I would call this submitted artwork, but I teach 100% at-risk high schoolers in the inner city. We take students who have been kicked out of every other school, have a history with the law, and even those expelled from other alternative programs. If they're here, it's because they have nowhere else to go. I love my job, just giving you a bit of background. So my first year teaching, I had a student who was, at best, unstable, and at worst, seriously needed more support than our school could provide. She was generally pleasant, but was known for outbursts of anger, talking to herself, hurting herself, and making threats. Her most consistent habit was that she always drew a Star of David on every single assignment before she turned it in. Being Jewish, I found it quite interesting, so one day I asked her why. The conversation went something like this. Me, can I ask you something? Her, yes, of course. Me, I notice you keep drawing this, pointing to the Star of David on every paper before you turn it in. I was just wondering if there was any reason why. Her. Oh, yeah, I'm really into Satan. I love him and I keep trying to summon him with it. Seriously, like seriously, that's what went through my head as I stood there, surprised. After I gathered myself, I politely asked her to stop drawing that on her papers. She did, but then she started drawing it on desks and chairs. The last one I saw was a Star of David with 666 written inside of it. Side note, she eventually got the mental health support she needed after an incident with one of our paraprofessionals. Story 23. First grade, the children were given an assignment to draw a picture and write a short story about what they would do over summer vacation. As I walked around the room helping the children with spelling, I noticed one student using a lot of red crayon. I stopped by his desk and saw he had drawn a dog with its tail sticking out and a large red shape coming from its rear. There were 5 brown circles within the red shape and what looked like a bean with 2 big X's on it. Above the dog's head were a bunch of colorful squiggly lines and a shovel. I honestly had no clue what was going on, but it made me a little uneasy. I asked him how this was related to summer vacation. He told me his dog had just had a litter of puppies, but sadly, one didn't survive. He said he was going to have a small memorial for the one that passed away and a birthday celebration for the ones that were alive. Thank goodness I asked him to explain. The drawing initially looked quite different. Story 24. I'm an art teacher. When I taught middle school, there was a phase where many students drew inappropriate things. One kid drew something on his paper, extended the lines across the back onto his friend's artwork, and even onto his table. When I asked him what he was doing, he just said, I call it the longest line. Now that I teach elementary school, the kids love to draw zombies, which seems to be of popular interest. One child drew himself near a group of zombies with his classmates nearby. It wasn't disturbing as much as it was kind of funny because his little self portrait had a huge happy smile on his face while his friends were near the zombies. Story 25. I'm not an art teacher, but I used to have a classmate in grades 1 to 3 who was really into drawing fire on everything. Every art project ended up having fire in it. Draw the pilgrims for Thanksgiving, they were surrounded by flames, the houses, the people, the food. Paint snowflakes for Christmas, Santa made an appearance and had flames around him, as well as the reindeer, houses, and gifts. 4th of July artwork? Perfect. More fire. Probably near the spectators at the bottom caused by the fireworks. The really interesting part was you always knew when he was drawing fire because he'd make this hissing, whooshing sound with his mouth as he drew it. It was like he was adding his own sound effects because he was the one creating the flames. I remember the teachers would used to audibly groan when they'd hear him or see his artwork and tell him that he couldn't draw fire on everything, but it didn't matter. He did what he wanted. I have no idea what happened to him after 3rd grade. His sister still came to our school all the way through graduation, but I never saw him again. Story 26. Not an art teacher, but I had a teacher get very upset about one of my son's drawings. The principal and the counselor even got involved, and I was called to an emergency meeting over highly concerning material. I was quite worried, as you would be when called to such a meeting. They showed me the highly concerning drawing. I almost burst out laughing. It was a drawing of the Headless Horseman. We'd been playing a Halloween seek and find puzzle game together, and my son was around 8 or 9 years old. Kids draw what's on their mind. I explained why I found it so funny, but I was met with disapproval. I then reminded them that Disney felt the Headless Horseman was appropriate enough to make a cartoon about, and told them I didn't see the issue. They weren't happy, but they couldn't really argue, especially since his occupational therapist had suggested we do seek and find type puzzles together. So yeah, I wasn't concerned. Highly concerning, please. Story 27. I'm a bit late to the party, but I taught English and I had the kids come up with their own inventions and create advertisements for them. One kid came up with the baby holder for when you didn't want to babysit or get tired of your baby, you would just attach it to the wall. He drew it in detail. I had to call the principal in for that one. That kid was such a spoiled little punk. He also picked on special ed kids. Also, I had one student that the other teachers whispered was so creepy, and one teacher was convinced he would be a danger. He wrote really dark poetry and would draw knives. I was a young, new teacher at the time, so after being removed from his other classes, he ended up being in my poetry elective class. And that kid was so cool. I sat down and chatted with him, and I discovered that he would draw knives because his uncle knew how to smith and make knives, and his uncle would sometimes create knives based on his designs. He also wrote some really beautiful poetry. It was dark at first, but once he got past trying to shock me and live up to his reputation, he wrote some great stuff. He even wrote some in a different language. I was really proud to say I made a connection with that kid when it seemed like everyone else just gave up on him. Apparently, he had a pretty awful home life. I hope he is doing well now. Story 28. In high school, I wanted to take a drawing class my senior year. First, I was required to take freshman art for a semester as a prerequisite. I hated this class and the teacher. She had uninspired assignments, like really uninspired. One project was to cut shapes out of a sheet of paper. If I tried to be different to make it fun and creative, I got poor grades, so to spite her, I made really unenthusiastic projects that barely met the requirements. For that paper project, you needed a certain number of different shapes, so my whole project was just cut the same cut triangle, rotated at different angles around the sheet of paper. It didn't work though. She loved my very unenthusiastic projects. She even hung them up and used them for examples. Story 29. I'm not a teacher, but I'm a parent. We got called into school one day and showed a picture my eldest, then six, had drawn. It was just a typical kid's picture stick people, trees, etc., and slightly off to the center, almost unnoticeable, was a stick figure girl with a sad face. The teacher said, Name says that is her. Oh dear, we thought she's sad about something, and we're about to find out. Then the teacher pulled out a whole stack of paper, all with the same feeling. Lots of people playing, birds in the sky, colorful trees, bright sun, and her looking sad. The last one had her holding a line and smiling. Oh, goodness. It turned out okay. She was sad and angry and expressed wanting others to feel as she did, a childish response, I guess. But she was soon diagnosed with some minor learning differences, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Erling syndrome, and got help to work with them. She's now well adjusted and happy or playing the long game. Story 30. Last year, I went on a high school service trip to Taiwan to help underprivileged kids who were struggling in school. The goal was to encourage them and show them the possibilities in the world. One of my friends taught a 7th grade class with a girl named JoJo. She came to class for a few days but then stopped attending. We assumed she simply didn't enjoy the class. A few days later, while my friend and her co-teachers were grading papers, she found that JoJo had drawn a very concerning picture on the back of her assignment. It showed a girl with something around her and two others in the background. One was crying. We were really worried and hoped she was okay. Story 31. Not an art teacher, but when I was in high school, we were supposed to be painting self-portraits. I finished mine rather quickly and was just experimenting, having recently realized I had some talent for painting. I ended up painting a surprisingly accurate 4x4-inch profile of my math teacher, knowing full well that this wasn't something I was going to show anyone because I'd get detention. I then threw it away. Later that day, I got called down to the dean of students, and when I entered his office, I saw the painting on his desk and another kid from my class sitting across from him. Before I could say anything, I was threatened with expulsion for drawing a caricature of a respected member of the faculty. It turned out one of my classmates had found it in the garbage and brought it to the library to make copies with some inappropriate phrases added when he was caught. He told on me for painting it and then essentially refused to explain his own actions. I had to explain to the dean that I had just started learning how to paint and that was what started out as just shapes and colors sort of became a pretty good likeness of the teacher. I had thrown the painting away because I knew painting likenesses of teachers without their permission was not a good idea. My quote-unquote co-conspirator confirmed that he took it out of the garbage and I was let go. I'm pretty sure the other kid was suspended. I was not allowed to paint portraits anymore in class. Story 32. When I was a first-year art teacher at high school, there was a student whose family had recently immigrated to the US. She was a 15-year-old freshman, spoke perfect English, and was a very capable artist. I could tell she had some underlying difficulties, but she never discussed them. We had just finished a series of lessons on facial proportions for drawing self-portraits. Instead of submitting a self-portrait for her final project, she turned in two portraits of two Middle Eastern males, one young and the other older. Confused, I asked her about them. Apparently, the younger man was her boyfriend, whom she was keeping secret from her parents. They had been together for at least a year, and she was very much in love with him, but her parents would never approve of their relationship. The portrait of the older man, she explained, was of a man in his 40s back in Pakistan, whom they were planning for her to marry after graduation in an arranged marriage. She desperately didn't want to marry this man and wanted to be with her boyfriend. She was crying as she explained the situation, telling me that this was apparently common in her family's culture. I had heard of arranged marriages, but had never encountered someone directly involved in one. Like someone unfamiliar with the situation, I encouraged her to speak with a counselor or her parents about her feelings. However, they had threatened to disown her if she didn't go through with it, and she expressed feeling hopeless about the future. As soon as she expressed such distress, I felt obligated to report the situation to my principal, the counselors, and the district authorities. She finished the school year with us and then left. I have no idea what happened to her. I can only hope she is okay wherever she is. This was 7 years ago. Story 33. Not a teacher, but in high school I had an art teacher who often made condescending remarks, calling us names and belittling our parents, never in front of them, of course, because they didn't expose us to what he considered high culture. Everybody seemed to love him for his use of strong language, but I always disliked him. I wasn't the only one who felt this way. He had to bring his child to work for a couple of days due to an emergency, and that child was wonderful with us while being quite difficult with him, never calling him dad but always using his first name. The child used to draw his father in various unfortunate situations. One drawing, which he pinned to the chalkboard, depicted his father lifted off the ground with animals nearby. I felt a lot of sympathy for that child. The teacher was later found in a compromising situation with a 15-year-old during a school trip. Surprisingly, he didn't lose his job, he was just prohibited from attending future school trips. Everybody continues to admire him. I struggle to understand people's perspectives sometimes. Story 34. Not so much disturbing once you hear the story, but in kindergarten, my youngest would draw pictures of skeletons dancing around what looked to be figures on the ground. Her teacher, who was in her first year of teaching, was very concerned. Apparently, especially since I had just divorced, and called me in to meet with her, the principal, and the school psychologist to, quote, discuss the concerning images. I came to the appointment right after work, dressed as I usually am in a zombie t shirt, jeans, and black boots. The teacher, having never met or seen me before, looked very bewildered and then embarrassed when the principal introduced me by saying, now do you understand the drawings a little better? My daughter was drawing skeletons and zombies dancing at the Halloween ball. We are a horror movie family. My kids have watched them since they were little, always age appropriate, i.e., Frankenstein at a young age, graduated to slasher films by early teen years. Story 35. I worked in a residential treatment center for young children in the early 90s. It was a very sad place that didn't do a great job meeting the needs of these young kids. There was one 8-year-old boy who acted out frequently and spent most of his time heavily medicated due to his intense outbursts. Most of the staff treated him like a problem child without seeing the sad little boy underneath. The kid could use strong language in a way that was surprising, and he could physically overwhelm the other children. It was unsettling to witness, and most staff reacted with similar negativity towards him. I ended up on his unit for the night shift. I began reading him books at night, which likely hadn't been done for him before. Slowly, he began to trust me and let down some of his defenses. He acted like the scared little boy he was with me, and I spent a lot of my time just comforting him while he cried. I was moved off the unit to the day shift, and he brought me a drawing on my last night, which was very unusual for him. He had spent hours coloring an entire page black with a pen, except for the very center, where he left a bright white spot with my name in it. I'm guessing I offered him a small bit of light in that difficult place. I still think of him with utter sadness because that kid just didn't have a fair chance. He was caught in the system, and I left. Story 36. Not disturbing, but pretty sad. I worked in a mental health hospital during college. Since I didn't have formal qualifications, one of my roles was to do art activities with the patients who needed more support, while the others attended group therapy. We had a well-equipped art room with many project options. One day, a patient suggested drawing pictures of their favorite vacation. One man drew a very simple picture of a pine tree like a young child might draw. At the end of the session, everyone shared a little about what their picture represented. When it was this man's turn, he said, I've never been on vacation. My parents go every year, and they stop giving me my medicine so they can bring me here while they go. If I ever go on vacation, I just want to sit under a tree and be happy. I wasn't sure if I should believe him, but I checked with some of the nurses, and they confirmed it. Every summer, the man was admitted around the same time, and his parents didn't visit for a couple of weeks while they were away. It was upsetting and sad on many levels. What kind of parents would intentionally stop someone's medication, leading to a mental health crisis and hospitalization? Story 37. Not art class or a teacher, but definitely related. In middle school, I was always doodling in my language arts notebook, and it was just after I got the game Modern Warfare 2. Being in middle school, I didn't fully grasp the seriousness of school violence. I began to draw my favorite mission in MW2, No Russian, because of its intense action. For those unfamiliar, No Russian is a mission where you play as an undercover operative involved in an attack at an airport. I drew a small sketch of a character in the bottom left of the page with a machine gun and left it at that for a while. I was kind of proud of how it looked, so I filled the page with drawings of my favorite weapons from the game. Soon, it looked like an armory with a figure holding a weapon in the corner. No one knew, so I didn't really care and was secretly proud of the effort. Well, towards the end of the year, my language arts teacher was looking at homework, and I began flipping through my notebook until she noticed the drawings. She just stopped flipping and looked at it for a while, and I suddenly realized, maybe I shouldn't have done this in a school book. She gave this look that had a hint of surprise. I sat there, quietly, awaiting my fate, and she just looked at me and said, should I be concerned about this? To which I quickly said I was completely fine and that it was just from a game. I never heard anything about it after that, but I might be on a watch list or two. Story 38. My mom is an artist and a therapist. I'm sure she has some intense stories she could tell. But if you're this far into the thread, here's a funny one instead. Growing up, I often used art instead of talking because I have trouble expressing myself verbally. Once, I drew a picture of her pointing something at my head. I drew myself looking upset on the ground and gave her the speech bubble, "I don't care if you're upset, do your homework," and slipped it under her bedroom door. I thought I had made an excellent point about how homework was pointless. Surely she would see things my way, and I would be free to watch TV as much as I wanted. She still has it, saved with all the drawings I did of cats and flowers, and she pulls it out every so often to show me and laugh. I'm 29 now. Story 39. I had a summer school kids class at the paint and sip studio where I worked. It was about 2 weeks for a few hours each day. There were two sisters, about 7 and 5, who absolutely loved to come. Paint and sip studios have an art instructor and assistant carefully guide a class through a painting. Everyone paints the same thing, step by step. The kids' class was similar, except kids like to express their creativity and have juice boxes. Anyway, we were painting ducks and flowers with a cute bee. I looked at the 5-year-old's painting, and there was one duck, one flower, and about 15 bees. I asked her if she really liked bees, and she told me no, no one likes bees. Her sister, who always painted exactly what was in the example painting and never anything else, had said that the 5-year-old's duck wasn't good, and the 7-year-old was allergic to bees. The 5-year-old was going to hang their paintings very close together in hopes that her bees might go over and bother her sister's perfect ducks. I said that wasn't very nice and the 7-year-old might be sad, to which the 5-year-old said no, the bees would bother her too. Then she signed her name, 5 inches high, in the middle of the canvas because that's who she is. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.